The smell of lilies. That's what I remember first. Not the pain, not the panic, not even the moment my legs gave out. Just the smell of those white funeral lilies my best friend Tilda had brought to the cemetery that morning, mixed with the wet grass under my knees as I went down. It was my husband's 21st anniversary, 21 years since the cancer took him from me on a cold November Tuesday, and every single year since, I'd gone to Pinecrest Memorial Gardens to sit with him for an hour. I'd tell him about the grandkids, about the garden, about whatever foolish thing Congress was doing that week. He always liked when I complained about politics, said it made him feel like he hadn't really gone anywhere. I was 67 years old. I'd just finished telling him about our daughter Carmen's new kitchen renovation when the headache hit me. Not a regular headache, this was something else. Like somebody had reached into the back of my skull with a pair of hot pliers and started squeezing. My right hand went numb first. Then my mouth wouldn't make the right shape for the words I was trying to say. Tilda was the one who called the ambulance. God bless that woman. She was 81 years old and had buried 2 husbands of her own, and she still had the presence of mind to dial 911 before she sat down beside me in the grass and held my hand and told me to keep my eyes open. Keep them open, Bonnie. Look at me, look at me. I remember the paramedics. I remember the siren. I remember a young man with red hair leaning over me in the ambulance saying, "Ma'am, can you tell me your daughter's number? We need to call your family." I gave him Carmen's cell. I gave him my son Russell's office line. I gave him my granddaughter Pippa's number too, because Pippa is the one who actually answers her phone. And then I don't remember anything for 4 days. When I woke up in that hospital bed, the first thing my eyes landed on was a window, late afternoon light. Yellow leaves outside, the kind of yellow that only happens in late October. There was a beeping sound somewhere near my left ear and a tube up my nose and something taped to the back of my hand that pulled when I moved. The second thing my eyes landed on was a girl sleeping in the chair beside my bed. Not Carmen, not Russell, not even Pippa. It was Marlene, my neighbor's foster daughter, the teenager from across the street. Let me back up and tell you about Marlene, because you need to understand who this girl is. 3 years ago, the Hendersons across the street took in a foster kid. Just one girl, 14 years old at the time, dark hair, quiet eyes, the kind of skinny that comes from not eating regular meals for a long stretch of life. Her name was Marlene, and she didn't talk to anybody for the first 6 months she lived on our street. I'd see her walking home from the bus stop with her hood up and her backpack hanging off one shoulder, and I'd wave, and she wouldn't wave back. But one day, I was out on my porch trying to drag a bag of potting soil up the steps, and my back went out halfway through. I just stood there bent over like an old question mark, and this little girl came across the street without me asking and picked up that bag and carried it up onto my porch and asked me where I wanted it. I said by the rose bushes, honey. And she carried it there. And then she sat down on my porch step and just looked at me for a minute and said, "My grandma used to grow roses." That was the beginning. She started coming over on Saturdays, helping me weed, helping me deadhead. We didn't talk much at first. Then we talked more at first. Then we talked more. She told me her mother was in prison. She told me her grandmother had raised her until the grandmother died of a heart attack in front of her when Marlene was 11. She told me she didn't believe in God anymore, but she missed believing in Him. I told her she didn't have to believe in anything she didn't want to believe in, but she was welcome at my church any time, and sometimes the just showing up part is what God cares about, not the believing part. She started coming with me on Sunday mornings, sat in my pew, held my hymnal. My own daughter Carmen never set foot in that church, not once in 20 years. So that's who was sleeping in the chair beside my hospital bed when I woke up. A 17-year-old girl who wasn't my blood, wasn't even my legal anything, just my neighbor's foster daughter, sitting there in her gray hoodie with her sneakers still on, drooling a little bit on her own shoulder. I tried to say her name and it came out wrong, just a sound. But she heard it. Her eyes snapped open, the way only a kid who's lived in foster homes knows how to snap their eyes open. Immediate. Alert, ready for whatever's coming. She saw me looking at her and she started crying. "Miss Bonnie," she said. "Oh, Miss Bonnie, you're awake. Oh, thank God." Oh, thank God. She didn't run for a nurse. She didn't call anybody. She just took my hand, the one without the tube taped to it, and she held it against her cheek and she cried. A doctor came in after a while. A woman, about my age, gray bun, kind eyes. She told me I'd had a stroke. A bad one. They'd done a procedure to remove a clot from an artery in my brain. They'd kept me sedated for the swelling. I'd lost some function on the right side, but with therapy most of it should come back. I was lucky to be alive, she said. I was lucky somebody had been with me when it happened. I asked about my daughter. The doctor paused. Just for a second, long enough for me to know. We've been trying to reach your daughter and your son since the day you came in, Mrs. Whitlow. We have a record here of the calls. She slid a piece of paper across the bedside table. I couldn't read it well. My vision was still fuzzy on the right side, but I could see the column of timestamps. The doctor read it for me. 63 calls to Carmen's cell phone over 4 days. None answered. 2 voicemails left. 41 calls to Russell's office and personal lines. None answered. 3 voicemails left. 6 calls to Pippa, who finally answered on the 7th call and said she was on a study abroad program in Edinburgh and was already trying to get a flight back. The doctor told me Pippa had landed at the airport 2 hours ago. She was on her way to the hospital right now. I closed my eyes. I thought, my daughter doesn't know I had a stroke. My son doesn't know either. And then I thought, no, that's not right. They know. Somebody told them. They just didn't pick up the phone. I asked Marlene to bring me my purse, which was on a chair against the wall. She brought it over. I asked her to find my phone. She found it. I had a text message from Carmen from 2 days ago. It said, "Mom, I saw I have some missed calls from some hospital number. I'm assuming it's a billing thing. Russell and I are at the resort with the kids for fall break. We won't have great service. Whatever it is, can it wait till Monday? Love you." That was it. That was the message. I let the phone fall onto the bedsheet. Marlene was watching my face. She didn't ask. She's a smart girl. She just took the phone and set it on the table, and then she said, "Pippa's coming. She'll be here soon. She already knows." I asked her how she knew. Marlene said the hospital had found her name and number in my emergency contacts on the form I'd filled out at my last physical. Apparently, I had listed her and her foster mom Denise as backup contacts after Carmen and Russell and Pippa. I hadn't remembered doing that, but I had. 6 months ago, the receptionist had asked me for emergency contacts, and I'd been thinking about how Carmen never answers her phone, and Russell screens everything, and I'd put Marlene and Denise on there as a just in case. That just in case had saved my life. Because here's what happened, the doctor told me later. They'd called my daughter and my son for 2 full days. Nobody picked up. The hospital was running out of options. They couldn't legally consent to the procedure I needed without a family member, not without going through a much longer process to declare me unable to consent from myself, which would have wasted hours I didn't have. On day 2, a nurse went down the list. Got to Denise. Denise picked up on the second ring. Denise drove to the hospital with Marlene. They sat with the social worker, Denise, who was not legally my anything, who was just the woman across the street, signed paperwork as my designated decision-maker because she had power of attorney that I had given her 2 years ago after Marlene's foster mom had a brain aneurysm scare, and we both realized how fragile everything was. I'd updated my documents that summer. Denise had agreed to be my medical proxy. I'd never told my children. I never thought it would actually matter. It mattered. Denise authorized the procedure that saved my life. While my daughter was at a resort with her husband and her kids, looking at a missed call from a hospital number and deciding it could wait until Monday. Pippa got to the hospital that night. She walked into my room still wearing the clothes she'd flown in, with her suitcase rolling behind her, and she dropped the suitcase and ran to me and put her head down on my chest and just cried like she was 5 years old again. She kept saying, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." I told her she had nothing to be sorry for. She told me her mother had called her that morning from the resort. Carmen had finally listened to the voicemails. Carmen had told Pippa that Grandma had a stroke, but it sounded like everything was fine. The hospital had handled it. No need to rush home. She'd come visit when they got back from vacation in 5 days. Pippa had hung up on her mother. Booked the next flight home. Pippa is 20 years old. She is the only one of my grandchildren who calls me without being asked. She is studying art history. Her mother wanted her to study finance. She is, I think, the only good thing my daughter has ever made. I held her and stroked her hair and told her she was a good girl. She had always been a good girl, and that I was all right. I was tired, but I was all right. Carmen showed up 4 days later. She came directly from the airport. She was wearing a sundress, and her hair was still in beach waves, and her skin was 3 shades darker than when I'd last seen her. She came into my hospital room, and she didn't even look at Marlene, who was sitting in the corner doing homework. She came straight to my bed and sat down on the edge of it and took my hand and said, "Oh, Mama. Oh, Mama." I came as soon as I could. I looked at her. I looked at her tan. I looked at her tan. I looked at her hair. I said, "Did you, sweetheart? Did you come as soon as you could?" She didn't catch the tone. She never does. She kept going. "The cell service at the resort was just terrible, Mama. I had no idea. The minute I got the full picture of what happened, we got on the next flight. Russell and Brett are still wrapping up some things. They couldn't come right now, but they send their love. Russell is my son. Brett is Carmen's husband. The fact that neither one of them bothered to come, even now, told me everything I needed to know about how my children had decided to spend the rest of my life." I asked her about the kids. Her 3. Carmen waved a hand. "Oh, they're fine. They're having such a good time. We didn't want to pull them out of the resort, you know, kids in routines. Brett's mom flew down to watch them so we could come check on you." Check on me. Check on me. Like I was a leaky faucet. I looked at her hand in mine. She had on a new bracelet I'd never seen before. Gold. Probably real. She'd always had expensive taste. She'd married a man with money, and she'd cultivated expensive taste her whole adult life. The only thing she'd never cultivated, as far as I could tell, was the part of herself that loved her mother. I asked her, "Did the hospital reach you on the first day?" Her face shifted. Just a fraction. The professional smile dropped a 1/4 inch. "Mama, I told you, the service at the resort was just terrible." "That's not what I asked." She blinked. I said, "Did the hospital reach you on the first day, sweetheart? Yes or no?" She let go of my hand. She straightened her sundress. "Mama, you're tired. We don't need to get into all this right now." "I'm not tired. I just slept for 4 days." "Did the hospital reach you on the first day?" She didn't answer. I said, "The doctor showed me the call log. 63 calls, to your phone alone, 41 to your brother, and you texted me from a resort to ask if it could wait until Monday." Her eyes filled up with tears. "Real ones, I think." Carmen has always been able to cry on command, but I think these were real. Not because she was sorry, because she was caught. "Mama, that's not fair. That's not how it happened." "Then tell me how it happened." She started talking. Long, fast, the way she always talks when she's covering something up, about how the resort had spotty service, about how she'd seen the missed calls but had assumed it was a robocall, about how she'd asked Russell what he thought, and Russell had said it was probably nothing, about how they'd been planning this vacation for a year, about how Brett's job had been so stressful, about how the kids had been looking forward to it, about how if she'd had any idea at all, she would have been on a plane immediately. I listened to her talk. I watched my daughter, the woman I had given birth to in a hospital not unlike this one, 43 years ago. The woman I had nursed through chickenpox and a broken arm and a teenage broken heart and a postpartum depression and a miscarriage between her second and third kids. The woman I had loaned money to 7 times that I could remember and forgiven the debt every single time. I watched her tell me a story that was almost entirely a lie, and I noticed something else, something I hadn't expected to notice. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even sad. I was just tired. The way you get tired of a song you used to like but have heard too many times. When she finally ran out of words, I said, "Thank you for coming, sweetheart. I think I need to rest now." She kissed my forehead. She told me she loved me. She told me she'd be back tomorrow. She left. Marlene looked up from her homework in the corner. She said, "Miss Bonnie, are you okay?" I said, "Yes, honey. I think I am." I was in that hospital for 11 more days. Carmen visited twice. Russell didn't visit at all, but he called me once on speakerphone while he was driving somewhere, and the call lasted 6 minutes. Brett never called. Pippa stayed in town. She'd taken a leave from her program in Edinburgh. She slept on a cot in my hospital room every night until I went home. She read to me when my eyes got tired. She brushed my hair. She painted my fingernails a soft pink she said reminded her of the inside of a seashell. Denise came every day. Marlene came every day after school. When I went home, Denise had already arranged a home health aide for the first 2 weeks. She'd cleaned my house. She'd stocked my fridge. She put fresh sheets on my bed and a new bar of lavender soap in the bathroom. I lay in my own bed that first night home, and I looked at the ceiling and I thought about my will. Now, I want to tell you something about my husband. He left me with a good amount of money when he died. Not rich money, solid money. A paid-off house, a life insurance payout, his pension, and a brokerage account he'd been quietly feeding for 30 years. By the time the dust settled, I had close to $400,000 in liquid assets, plus the house, plus a small inheritance my mother left me, plus Social Security. I had always intended, since the day he died, to leave most of it to my children and grandchildren. That was the plan. That was the assumption. That's what mothers do. But you know what I realized, lying in my own bed that first night home from the hospital? I realized I had been operating on an assumption that my children would behave like family, and they had been operating on the assumption that I would leave them everything no matter how they behaved. We had been holding 2 very different sets of cards. I called my attorney 3 days after I got home. His name is Lawrence, and he's been my lawyer for 19 years. Quiet man, doesn't waste words. I told him I wanted to update my will. He came to my house, sat at my kitchen table, drank the coffee Marlene had made him. I told him what I wanted. I wanted my daughter Carmen to receive $1. One single dollar. I wanted my son Russell to receive $1. Same deal. I wanted my granddaughter Pippa to receive $75,000 in a trust she could access at 25 for graduate school or a down payment. I wanted Denise to receive $25,000 as a thank you for being my medical proxy and for raising the kind of daughter who would sit beside an old woman's hospital bed. I wanted Marlene to receive $100,000 in a trust managed by Denise until Marlene turned 21 to be used for college, vocational training, a first car, a first apartment, a first business, whatever she wanted to build with her one life. The rest of my estate, after the house was sold and the accounts liquidated, I wanted divided between 3 places: my church, the hospital that saved me, and a foster family resource organization that Denise had told me about, the kind that supports kids aging out of the system. Lawrence wrote it all down. He looked at me over the top of his glasses. He said, "Bonnie, are you sure about the dollar?" I said, "I am very sure about the dollar, Lawrence." He said, "Most people in this situation just leave the disinherited party out entirely. The dollar feels like a statement." I said, "It is a statement." He nodded once and went back to writing. We signed everything 2 weeks later. Witnessed. Notarized. Filed. I didn't tell my children. I didn't tell anyone. I just kept living. Marlene graduated high school the following spring. I was in the 3rd row sitting next to Denise. Carmen didn't come, even though I'd invited her. She said she had a charity gala that night. Pippa decided not to go back to Edinburgh. She transferred to a school close to home. She visited me every Sunday for dinner. Marlene came too, most weeks. The 3 of us would sit at my kitchen table and eat pot roast and laugh about things, and I'd look at those 2 young women and think, this is family, this right here. The blood thing is a coincidence. The choosing thing is the real thing. A year and a half went by. Then Carmen called me one Tuesday morning in a state of pure panic. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her at first. I had to ask her to slow down 3 times. It turned out Brett had been having an affair for 4 years with his executive assistant, and the executive assistant had just shown up at Carmen's front door with documentation, including a lease for an apartment Brett had been paying for, and photos and bank records. Brett was filing for divorce. He'd been planning it for 2 years, apparently. He'd been quietly moving assets into accounts in his mother's name. He'd hired a lawyer who was, in Carmen's words, a monster. Carmen was going to lose the house. Maybe most of the savings. Maybe the cars. She needed money. She needed a place to stay while she figured things out. She needed her mother. I sat on my couch and I listened to her cry into the phone. I felt something in my chest. Not nothing. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a woman without feeling. She is my child. There was a part of me that wanted to say, honey, come home. Come home right now. Mama will fix it. But there was a bigger part of me that remembered lying on the wet grass at my husband's grave with my mouth not working. There was a bigger part of me that remembered a text message that said, can it wait until Monday? I said, Carmen, I'm sorry this is happening to you. I really am. She said, Mama, can I come stay with you for a while? Just until I figure this out. I don't have anywhere else to go. I said, sweetheart, I love you, but no. There was a silence on the line so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, what? I said, you can't stay here. I'm sorry. I'm not in a position to take on a house guest. She said, Mama, I'm your daughter. I said, yes, you are. And when I was lying in a hospital bed with a tube up my nose, you were sitting at a resort. So I think we have established what being daughter means in our family. She started screaming at me, the kind of screaming Carmen does when she doesn't get her way. She has been doing it since she was 3. I have lived under it my whole adult life. I listened for about 12 seconds. Then I told her I loved her and I hung up. She called back 43 times that day. I didn't pick up. 43. I counted later because I appreciated the symmetry. She came to my house 2 days later, pounded on the door. I didn't open it. Denise came over from across the street and stood on my porch with her arms crossed and told Carmen she needed to leave or Denise would call the police. Carmen left. She sent me a letter the following week, 12 pages, handwritten, mostly about how I had ruined her life by not being available when she needed me. There was one paragraph in the middle where she apologized for the hospital. One paragraph, sandwiched between 11.5 pages of how I had failed her. I read the letter twice. Then I put it in the kitchen drawer with the other things I keep but don't look at. Russell called me about a month after that. Wanted to know if I would consider helping his sister out just a little, just enough to get her on her feet. He had a tone in his voice I'd never heard before. Almost gentle, almost concerned. I knew immediately that Carmen had told him she'd asked me and I'd said no, and now he was trying a different angle. I said, Russell, when was the last time you came to see me? He didn't answer right away. I said, I had a stroke 1.5 years ago. You called me once, 6 minutes from your car. You have not been to my house. You have not had a meal with me. You have not asked me how my therapy is going or whether I can lift my right arm above my head yet. He said, Mama, I've been so busy. I said, I know you have, sweetheart. I love you. But the answer is no. Goodbye. I hung up. Marlene moved into the spare bedroom at Denise's house a few months ago. Officially, Denise adopted her last year, just before she turned 18, which doesn't usually happen in foster care. But Denise pushed it through. Marlene calls Denise Mom now. She still calls me Miss Bonnie. I asked her once if she wanted to call me Grandma, and she got real quiet and she said no, because Grandma was already someone, and she didn't want to take that name away from somebody else. So she calls me Miss Bonnie still. I am 69 years old as I tell you this. My right hand still has a slight tremor. I can't write the way I used to, but I can hold a coffee cup. I can pull weeds. I can hug a girl who calls me Miss Bonnie when she comes over for Sunday dinner. I want you to know something. If you are watching this and you are a mother or a father or a grandparent and you are scared, family is not who shares your blood. Family is who picks up the phone. I learned that lying on the ground in a graveyard, smelling lilies, watching the world go gray at the edges, I keep my $1 bills ready. I have 2 of them in my desk drawer. They have the names of my children written on little sticky notes and pressed to them with a paperclip. I am at peace. I have a granddaughter who calls me every Sunday. I have a girl across the street who used to be nobody's daughter and is now my chosen one. I have a friend named Denise who signed a paper that kept me alive. The phone is going to ring someday with one of my children on the other end. Carmen, probably. Maybe Russell. They will need something. They will want something. They will cry, or they will be angry, or they will pretend that none of this ever happened. I will let it ring. I will let it ring 47 times if it has to, and then I will go pull weeds with Marlene, and we will not say anything about it because she will already know. I think about that morning at the cemetery more than people would expect, not because of the stroke. The stroke was just a body doing what bodies do at 67. I think about it because of what it revealed. Every choice my daughter Carmen had made in the 4 decades I raised her had been quietly adding up to that one text message at the resort. Can it wait till Monday? 6 words. And every choice I had made too, the ones I didn't even know were choices at the time, had been quietly adding up to a teenage girl named Marlene, sleeping in a chair beside my hospital bed. That is the part nobody tells you when you're young. Everything you do is a seed. The kindness I showed a quiet foster kid carrying a bag of potting soil up my porch steps 3 years before my stroke, that was a seed. The medical proxy paperwork I signed in Denise's kitchen because I was scared and being honest about it, that was a seed. The Sunday mornings I spent in a pew instead of in bed, the small consistencies I never thought anyone noticed. Those were seeds too. And the seeds my daughter planted, the missed birthdays, the loaned money she never paid back, the phone calls that went to voicemail year after year, those were also seeds. We were all gardening the whole time. We just didn't know it. What I want you to understand, if you are sitting somewhere right now feeling unseen by the people you raised, is that you have not been wasting your love. You have been planting it. Sometimes in soil that won't grow it. But the love itself was never wasted because the act of giving it is what makes you the kind of person who can recognize real love when it shows up wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a bag of soil. If I had been a bitter woman, Marlene would have crossed the street and never spoken to me. She would have sensed it. Kids who grow up rough can smell bitterness from a block away. I had to find some nerve in my late 60s that I didn't know I had. The nerve to say no to my own daughter. The nerve to write $1 bills with my children's names on them and not feel like a monster. The nerve to keep loving Carmen from a distance instead of letting her use the word mother as a credit card she never intended to pay off. That kind of nerve is not cruelty. It is the bone-deep understanding that real love sometimes means refusing to fund the lie that's destroying the person you love. So tend your garden. Pay attention to who shows up when nothing is being offered in return. Update your paperwork. Tell the truth, even when the truth costs you the version of family you thought you had. Be the kind of old woman a foster kid would carry potting soil for. Everything you give comes back, just not always from the door you expected it to walk through.